as the synthetic wonder of dominatrix fades into the cyberoptic ethers. I'm here with you. This is Robert Phoenix. You are listening to the Sunday version of Free Association Radio. And welcome to the Eternal Now, where we do our very best to drop what's behind us and what's in front of us and be here with the moment. And tonight's moment will feature Andrew Harvey. He is a world-renowned scholar, poet, author, and activist. And I'm pretty psyched to have him on the show. We're going to be calling him up in a few minutes. And I think he is in Oak Park, Illinois, if I'm not mistaken. He's just returned back from Europe. I think he was in France. Pretty good life, pretty good gig. He was there teaching, and now he's back, and apparently he's going to be headed down to Taos to do something. My connection with Andrew is through two sources. One is through my friend Richard Grossinger, who is the publisher of two of Andrew's books, including his latest, Heart Yoga, on North Atlantic Press. And the other is through my dear friend Dora McQuaid, also an activist poet, a sacred activist poet in her own right. And she is part of a collective down in Taos that brings people like Andrew down there to teach and to talk, and to do workshops, and to get people's consciousness wrapped around this whole concept of poetry and sacred activism. So we're going to be talking about the dimensions of sacred activism and what that actually means to be a sacred activist. In many instances, they seem to be sort of dialectically opposed. The life of the mystic is an interior life, and the life of the activist is an exterior life, one built on action. And we'll be talking to Andrew about how to fuse those dualities and those polarities when it comes to sacred activism. And we'll talk about some of the nuances as well, and how he is able to reconcile those, not only in his work, but in his own life. And we'll talk about his new book, Heart Yoga. Before we do, just a couple of mentions here. Of course, the show is always brought to you by Vigilante Vodka. It is so good, it is almost criminal. You go to vigilantevodka.com and send an email to my friend Mike up there in Montana, and he will tell you all about his boutique vodka. It is small batch, individually crafted. It makes a very interesting gift for anybody that's into vodka. It has a unique sort of combination between the Wild West and boutique vodka. You're not going to find that too many other places. So anyway, go there, go to the site, and if you're interested, send Mike an email. He doesn't have any ordering functions on his site, but if you're serious enough, he'll send you a couple of bottles, and you can figure out how to do that. The cap on the well is in place, and people are crossing their fingers and holding their noses as to what this might actually do. If you missed Friday's show, I would heartily recommend you go into the archive, which you can find on the Blog Talk page, my show page, and listen to it. I had on that show Michael Edward, and Michael is from Florida. He lives in Florida, and Michael he's been down there for 30 years, and he's not just anybody. He's somebody who's deeply involved. He has an animal sanctuary, number one, and he's been deeply involved in geopolitical affairs for a really long time. He was in the Army for an incredibly long time, so he's got connections in that world. He's also a deeply spiritual man. We did not talk about that part of Michael's life in full on Friday. We didn't even really touch on it, but we will. I'm going to have Michael back on the show next Sunday night, and we're going to kind of revisit where we are with the golf then. And when I talked with him, of course, they had just put the cap on the well, and Matt Simmons, later in the day, I believe it was either Friday or Saturday, Matt Simmons confirmed what Michael was sharing with us on the show on Friday, which was that there was another big gusher 12 to 13 miles away, and that's really the problem. The transoceanic deep horizon well was the relief well, and they had problems with that, and now they're just plugging the relief well. But unfortunately now there has been some buckling and some seepage under the ocean floor, and everybody is crossing their fingers to make sure that this is going to turn out the way they'd like it to. And we're all waiting around to find out what the next move is on BP's part. And our president, this is interesting, our president is in Bar Harbor this weekend, hanging out with the governor of Maine. And he's on Mount Carmel Island, which is, I believe, where my buddy Richard Grossinger lives, part of the year. And I think he's probably out there right now. And I hope the president is enjoying his vacation. It's nice and restful. And meanwhile, people down in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida are sweating their balls off, trying to figure out what they're going to do for a living, while BP drags their ass and tries in terms of reimbursing them. So that is where our president is this weekend, hanging out on the same turf as Richard Grossinger. So that's what's happening with the well, and we're just gonna, I guess, watch where this thing goes next, and keep our eyes on the cap, so to speak. There's been some fault activity down there. They had an earthquake in Washington, D.C., of all places, yesterday. And, of course, the New Madrid had a little quake, about a 3.5er. So there's some activity in that part of the world, and maybe even running upwards, ironically, towards Washington, D.C. So we're going to have to keep our eye not just on what's happening with the oil, but what's happening, in the earth. A good friend of mine was going to go vacation down in Tulum for almost 3 weeks, and she asked me, what I thought about that. And I said, well, you're going to have to be fluid, literally, because this thing is changing all the time. And sure enough, a few days later, the word out of Mexico is the oil is now approaching the Mexican Caribbean side, and this is awful. I mean, this is god awful, because what potentially could happen now is everybody sort of saw this as moving sort of in this circular, so almost spiral, like, column, and then up the Atlantic coast, and then sort of coming back down a little bit, doing sort of a kind of a U, and then coming back up towards England, and hitting the north coast. Well, there's a very good possibility now that with the level of oversaturation, and the Gulf may be just entirely oversaturated, that this oil is going to actually hit the Panama Canal. And if it hits the Panama Canal, and they decide to open the locks, and that oil now goes into the Pacific Ocean, well, we're in a very, very tricky place at that point, because now we've got, at least if they can keep it, hopefully in the Caribbean part of the Atlantic, and somehow are able to cap this thing, both of the wells, then they have a remote shot at containing and cleaning up this disaster. But if they open up the Panama Canal and just let this thing continue to flow, we're going to have saturation very quickly on all fronts. And that oily water will then head up the Pacific Ocean. It'll head up the Pacific coast. Ultimately, it'll make its way to Alaska and come back down around and sort of do the reverse of what it was going to do on the other side of the Atlantic. But nonetheless, our oceans will get covered in oil faster if they do that. So keep an eye on the oil, not just headed towards the Atlantic, but headed towards the Panama Canal. And trust me, it will. And trust me, it's a dialogue that we're going to be having probably within the next 3 to 4 weeks about what they're going to do with that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 21st century technology to reach our friend, Andrew Harvey, and get him on the show here. And let me just go into my 21st century address book and try to find his phone number here, which I have not taken down, so bear with me as I try to do this. Here we go. This is compelling radio, I know, but it'll be worth it. It will definitely be worth it. Here we go. We're in here, and let's go right here. And one more. Nope, not quite. It should be right there. There we go. No. Hold on. How about here? No. Last one. I promise. Once I do this, I will have it. Voila. Found. Here we go. Okay. Let's avail ourselves of this amazing Atlantean technology and connect with somebody halfway across the country and bring them into the proceedings. Here we go. See what happens. We're dialing.
Hello?
Hello, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Lovely to hear you. If this phone misbehaves, which it sometimes does...
Did it just misbehave now? I think your phone just misbehaved. So you were very prescient about that. Well, let's try this again. That Andrew, he knew what was going on, didn't he?
Already disconnection.
It did. It misbehaved right on cue, Andrew. That's pretty good.
I know. God almighty, my synchronistic powers are dazzling me.
Manifesting on cue. So, is there another number I should have, or can we just roll with this? Or
well, let's roll with this. But there is a number, my cell, and I'll have it in my hand in case anything goes wrong.
All right. So I have one of those. You ever see the Men in Black? Remember that movie?
Yes.
I have one of those little things that erases memories.
Oh, how wonderful!
I'll do it for your phone number after this show. Okay.
No, you're always welcome to ring me. Don't worry about it.
Right, I like that. You're open. I love that. So you just got back from Europe, is that right?
Yes, I had a marvelous time. I was teaching in the Chartres Mystery School, which I co-founded, and it's a mystery school that builds on the old mystery school of Chartres. In fact, it was founded on the 1000th year of the first school's founding, so in 2006. So it's an amazing adventure we're on, and it was really exciting this year.
I could only imagine. How did you get drawn into that?
Are we on tape now?
Yes.
Oh, how wonderful! I'll go on and on if you want me to. What happened was I was on a pilgrimage in France to all the sacred feminine places, the places of Mary Magdalene, and also the places of the Mother, and especially the Black Madonna in her shrine in Rocamadour. It was a very potent pilgrimage. And then it was for Wisdom University, and we got to Chartres. And Chartres is an overwhelming experience, but after all of those sites, it became even more luminous. It really revealed a little bit of its truth, which is that it's a huge nuclear reactor of divine power. It's a magnificent building that enshrines all the deepest principles of the birth of the divine in the human, and it's on a hill that was the sacred place of the ancient indigenous people who worship the Divine Mother in her dark aspect there, and the aspect of the Black One, who gives birth to the worlds. So it's a huge place, and I happened to read a book called The Golden Age of Chartres, which was about how these extraordinarily awake and passionate group of men, headed by Fulbert of Chartres, founded a Chartres mystery school, which was dedicated really to the final mystery enshrined in Chartres, which is the birth of the divine in the human, the birth of the divine in the heart, the mind, and the body, because they believed that that was Jesus' essential message to humanity, not only that he was, of course, a unique being, but
Right.
that he was a pioneer of a birth that could be embraced
Right.
and lived. So this thrilled me, and I said to Jim Garrison, who was with me in the train, I said, read this book, and he read it, and he was thrilled, and then we both decided sort of in one great burst of enthusiasm that we would co-found the Chartres Mystery School 1,000 years after it was founded originally, to pursue the same mystery, and this time, how could we bring together all ancient and modern knowledge, spiritual, other kinds, to birth a school of mystery that would help humanity through this period of very great distress.
Right.
So
Right.
we used the ancient model of the seven liberal arts, and Jim Garrison, who was the amazing president of Wisdom, is the one who's been pioneering all this and embodying all this. And we've met 5 times, and now on the 5th time, the magic happened. I think you can love your colleagues very much and respect them very much, and I think we all had great love and great respect for each other, but this time we were able to have great harmony and great mutual interplay as well, which is a new dimension. I think that we were all humbler, and more serious, and also more playful, and so it resulted in a miraculous experience, which is lingering with me deeply and inspiring me as I undergo my own first trying out of a new initiation template that I'm working on with my own group in the Institute of Sacred Activism in Oak Park. In fact, we've just had the first day, and it was an astonishing first day. Because we're working on the same mystery from the point of view of how to help people feel the divine within themselves, in their minds as illumined understanding, gnosis in their hearts as this divine compassion and passion for reality.
Right.
And it is an experience of increased embodiment, because I'm convinced that the birth of the divine human is trying to take place, that it's the authentic meaning of this dreadful crisis, that this crisis is a kind of crucible, a death crucible which births the new. It is Kali dancing. Kali is destroying to birth, not to annihilate. And participating with that takes a lot of strength. It's not something you can do on anything but the strongest diet, and that's what we're trying to provide.
Right. So is this a group that you meet with? It's a consistent group?
Well, I founded the Institute of Sacred Activism because I wrote a book called The Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism, which basically introduced the term and laid down what I believe to be the vision that's necessary to do this birth, because of my own inner experience and because of my study of the mystical traditions and because of my sense of the enormity of the crisis as a divine event, an event in our evolution, an evolutionary event which has 2 fundamental faces, the face of the destruction of our agendas and illusions, the face of the annihilation of the collective human force self, which is now lethal and murderous, and the face of the birth, which is the birth of what is born out of the destruction of the force self, which is the beginnings of divine consciousness, and the capacity, therefore, to work as embodied divine humans with the divine directly to transform the situation and help co-create with the divine a wholly new kind of human being, doing and being in very, very different ways and relationships to transform our current reality, which is untransformable from the level of consciousness which we are now in.
Right. It seems to me that it's probably one of the most difficult tasks of that we can undertake, because what we're talking about here is reconciling duality and polarity, the inner life and the outer life, and simultaneously saying yes and no at the same time, which it's a koan, it's a complete koan, and to be able to do that takes a great deal of practice and awareness and presence and consciousness. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, you couldn't have said it better. Thank you for understanding it so completely. I think you only get the reality of the situation when you realize you're going to have to go into permanent training.
Right.
And that means really having 5 kinds of practice at the core of your life. Cool sacred practices that calm you down, that keep you steady, that keep you stable and connected with the divine peace. Heart sacred practices that keep your heart awake and in a state of adoration and gratitude and compassion. whatever the circumstances. So you have to train your heart to be strong enough to go on loving even in hell and great difficulty. Prayer practices that align you with the beloved at all moments, even the most difficult. Sacred physical practices, like the new yoga that I've tried to pioneer with my friend Karuna Erickson in our book Heart Yoga, a yoga that combines the deepest mystical roots of yoga with the light mysticism of evolutionary mysticism, so as to make yoga a crucible for the divinization of the body, a conscious crucible. And sacred dance and Reiki, other marvelous disciplines that enable you to open the body up to divine energies and awaken the latent divine energies within the body. And then you also need shadow work, because you cannot deal with the crisis without undertaking two levels of shadow work. An understanding of the collective shadow and the way in which it's keeping us paralyzed and depressed and in terrible dread and really wishing we weren't here, and our own shadow with its cowardice, with its narcissism, with its greed, with its desire for comfort, with its terror of standing out, all the things that keep us from realizing our own true empowerment.
Right.
And that's very difficult work, but it's possible. And if you combine all those things, then you are truly working with this evolutionary force that's birthing the mirth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In relation to that, we're also talking about two other dualities or polarities, and that's East and West. And you're extremely well versed and steeped in the Eastern tradition, and Eastern classical tradition of letters and so forth. And I'd love your take on is the Eastern tradition antithetical to the Western mind? Jung actually touched on this.
Not at all. No. Well, Jung was talking for himself at a very particular moment of human evolution, where he really needed to make available the Western tradition of alchemy. And so he followed the Grail, not Ramana Maharshi. But I think what has happened since Jung is that the global heart-mind has come together in a marriage of the very best of the East with the very best of the West. And this marriage was prefigured in the great evolutionary philosopher Aurobindo, who himself was Indian but was educated in Cambridge, was a classical scholar, came back to India as a revolutionary, and then became the greatest ever evolutionary philosopher, perhaps the greatest mystical philosopher of the world, combining a Eastern understanding of divine identity with divine consciousness, with a Western belief that history is the dancing ground of evolution and of a evolutionary destiny for humanity, so that he fused the peace of identity, the radiance and freedom and liberation of identity, with the great battle for the birth of the divine human in matter on the earth, which is the secret meaning of the Western quest for ever greater progress.
Right.
And this was a huge achievement on the most massive scale, because it brought a new world into being, which he was experiencing himself and giving the directions to achieve. So that is the central vision that I think all evolutionary philosophers, whether they agree completely with Aurobindo or differ with him on certain aspects, they all must take their roadmap from him, because that's the complete, I think, map for what we are going through. We're going through a huge evolutionary event, which is unprecedented in its difficulty, but unprecedented also in its possibility, and we should concentrate on the possibility with all our hearts now, because only that will make us strong enough, and we need to realize that possibility in the core of our lives as a reality, because then we won't be reading it in books, we'll be living it in our lives, and that will give us the strength and the passion and the peace and the clarity and the sheer doggedness that we're going to need to help the human race not only survive but transform what is coming down.
Right. Well, there's a lot.
Does that make sense to you?
Well, it does make sense to me.
And it's the marriage, you see, of East and West.
I respect Aurobindo a great deal as far as the Indian mystics go. He's right up there with me, and his work in the body is it's exemplary.
It's crucial. That is the crucial work, because without the body becoming sacred in every way, there's no embodiment. So Auribindo's work is absolutely core, as indeed is the work of the tantric renaissance that's happened in the last 40 years.
Let me ask you a quick question, just departing. I'm sorry, I just jumped in here because the thought came into my mind. Let's say you're a fisherman down in the Gulf of Mexico, and you don't know Aurobindo from Paramahansa Yogananda. I mean, these are very foreign terms, and you know that at this point in time, your way of life is being threatened by a force.
Very good question.
Far greater than you can understand at this point. How first of all, what does that represent culturally, and what would you share with somebody like that in that situation?
First of all, I would say to them, this tragedy that has happened to you is shared by millions of people all over the world who have survived even worse tragedies with extraordinary grace, humility, and dignity. So can you. And I would talk to them about my Indian friends and my African friends and people I know in Haiti who have managed to come through absolute hell and got through it with great dignity and renewed purpose and deeper compassion, and that there is a way through, and it's through the heart. And what everyone who meets great affliction needs to do is to surrender to the divine love that is using this affliction and can use this affliction to greatly open their hearts, greatly deepen their trust in God, and awaken them to the real situation which is going on in the culture, which is that we are dominated by corporations who have no morals and don't care about anything except making money. And it's time that they let this situation open their minds and hearts and bodies to the reality of a very oppressive system which is bound to treat people like that in the end, and that they're suffering for that, but that they can use their pain to get wise and to awaken the country to what's really happening.
I think that's a brilliant and lucid answer. Can we talk about some of the stages that somebody like that would go through? I mean, we're talking about anger, we're talking about grief, and
yes, you're talking for the first thing that I would do if I had the chance would be to take down an amazingly powerful group of nonviolent communicators, people who know how to allow people to let out the full extent of their grief and rage in conditions that are guiding them through a process with it, very tenderly, very simply, very humbly. These kinds of people exist, this kind of training exists. It's crucial to helping people deal with trauma because it simultaneously allows people to express the full range of the trauma and then uses that full expression to help ease them towards acceptance and surrender and forgiveness in their own time, but knowing that that's the destination that's going to free them and free them to find the energy to reconstruct their life with hope.
And where does action rise out of this, Andrew?
Well, I think everything should go together because I think I would advise them to do deeper inner work, to pray to the divine as they understand it for strength and support, and to do these exercises of nonviolent communication. And I would teach them some wonderful spiritual exercises that I know from different traditions, which anyone can do and can be uplifted by and strengthened by. And then I would simultaneously advise them to start organizing so that their point of view with a very clear critique of the way in which the corporations have behaved and the government has behaved gets through on a national level. And I would offer my services and the services of other spiritual teachers to help them craft this message so that it gets really clear to the heart of the problem, which is that they have been deprived of their livelihood because a group of very greedy people in league with the government of the United States at many levels has for years been raping the environment without any consequences. Now a major mistake has been made, and it has to be seen as a call to the radical, and I mean radical, regulation of corporations.
Right.
And this is what I would say to them. I mean, it might freak them out, but that's what I would say because that's what I believe.
Right. Right. Well, I think that that would be a pretty good mid to long range goal down in that region. And I would say that for me and a lot of the people that are in my circle, And just from my wanderings, my nomadic wanderings around the internet, what this event is doing is it is waking people up at a wholesale level. I've never seen so many people come alive from so many different backgrounds and political viewpoints. Is this something that you're experiencing as well?
I am, and I'm also experiencing the opposite. I'm also experiencing in America already going to sleep about it. I think both are happening, and I think that this is what our time is like. There are people who just simply don't want to see, and they're going to take very deep difficulties to wake up, which will probably have to be financial, I think. I think a great many Americans still believe in big oil. I think a great many Americans, even after this, believe that we should lift the ban on offshore drilling, which seems to me a proof of insanity. I think people should be locked up into lunatic asylums for thinking that that could be true, but it is true. And I think that the capping of the well by BP was greeted with such relief because it was almost a sign that we could stop thinking about it, whereas in fact the evolutionary damage is going to go on for hundreds of, perhaps even thousands of years, and that we've created a nightmare.
And for people in the know, that cap is just a Band-Aid, and there's a big gash about 13 miles south of that is still bleeding profusely. This is what Matt Simmons shared the other day, and one of my contacts down in the Gulf shared with me earlier on Friday, that there is yet another well. It's the main well that apparently blew on the 13th of February, and the 420 well was the relief well that blew. So what we're seeing is a mediated, literally, event with the secondary well and a completely other crisis and disaster that most people's attention is being diverted from.
Well, right. You see, this is what I think we're really up against. I think Obama's made some kind of wild mistake because he's legally made it impossible to report on the Gulf area, the area that's directly affected, because it's a felony to go in there in any way.
That's right.
So that really raises suspicions about, is there a massive cover-up about the authentic damage being done, and who's really responsible for it? Because if eventually the ties between BP and other big oil companies and government lobbyists and government policy become clear, then we'll really know that what we all know already, which is that this democracy is the best democracy money can buy. And at that moment, I think a lot of illusions about America will fall for Americans.
Yeah, absolutely.
So naturally, they're going to stop that getting out. So we're going to have a kind of tug of war between people waking up and wanting to find out more what's really going on, and between them and people who think it's all been solved, they're safe, we're perfectly okay, technology can solve everything, it doesn't matter that it's going to be 1,000 years of environmental desolation in that place, or hundreds of thousands of animals have died. Nothing.
So when I think of this, Andrew, I think of...
And I'm not being cynical, I truly am not, because I'm truly heartened by the awakening, but I think we always have to see the other side and keep saying...
Well, I think it's important. I think it's vital, and I agree with you, and a lot of people, in quote-unquote the New Age community or the light worker community have been holding on to this, shining image that everything is going to be okay. And
well, that's absolute rubbish, and they are just indulging in fake mysticism. It's all rubbish. That's a garbage mysticism, and it's been sold in the garbage New Age, and it's a total tragedy because very decent people who don't know anything about the authentic mystical traditions buy this garbage thinking they're going to be educated by it. Of course, this is nonsense. I mean, how does we expect to make an evolutionary leap simply by oming and schmoeming? We've got to change deeply. Human nature has to be transformed to receive these new energies, and that transformation is a difficult, rigorous one that the mystical traditions know a lot about and has nothing whatever to do with wanting to use occult power to manifest Mercedes and McMansions. It has nothing to do with cultivating prosperity for yourself alone. It has nothing to do with a simplistic vision of the light as being the only reality, when it's quite clear that when the light manifests as reality, it manifests in a dance of opposites, which includes the dark and everything we call evil and everything we call terrifying and menacing and destructive. And we've got to get real that all those things are all God.
Yeah, I agree. That's incredibly well said. And I could not agree more. And I think we're starting to see some perspective shift in that area with some folks that have been taking the light vitamins, and that.
Well, and actually, I don't think so. I think we have again a two different strands of teaching about the future going on simultaneously. One that I consider a totally false and misleading one, in which this shift is certain. All we have to do is vibrate. We can keep the corporations. We can keep our way of life. We just have to send out love and light. This is nonsense. This is denial. This is bad mysticism. It has nothing to do with the rigors and demands of the birth that's being asked of us. And it is actually drugging and paralyzing people and keeping them immensely banal and stupid and heartless in the face of a shattering human condition.
Yeah, I agree. And childlike as well.
Worse than childlike. Childlike would be, as Jesus said, an initiatory state. This is childish, entitled, spoiled, narcissistic. It's an entirely narcissistic vision of God. God's just there to do exactly what you want, and you being wonderfully attuned can get God to do exactly what you want. This is an obscene version of God, as if God was a power we could play with, when God is actually a force we have to submit to and surrender to be able to be transformed by it, because it will not enter places where the ego is making dirty bargains for itself. My God, what a vision of the divine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. It's
horrific, and it's banal, and it's boring, and it's paralyzing, and that part of the New Age has been a complete disaster. It is stupefied even further an already stupefied populace.
Well, yes, I totally agree, and I think that there has to be some accountability for quote unquote New Age teachers and New Age leaders.
Oh my God, I think there should be I would put in a kind of radiant inquisition of people with half a brain who would say this is bullshit unless you have a daily account of what new bullshit had been published. I mean, somebody on a call the other day, and I won't name her, said, and she's a pretty well-known teacher, that if we all prayed, our good intentions could clear the gulf of all environmental damage in 6 years. And everybody cheered and said, how wonderful, but this is absolute madness. Do we really think that we're going to get off so lightly from the contamination and pollution and devastation of the earth? Who do we think we are playing with? Do we think we have total control on this earth and can now use intentional prayer to just clean up our caca? Or do we really start to realize that we're in the hands of a divine that deeply loves us, but is also having to heal us because we're desperate addicts of power and domination by a desperately difficult bottoming out, which through miraculous grace is also going to be a birth? Let's get real about what's really going on and stop this infantile version of it.
Yeah.
And that was where the other strand of teachers come in, which I hope I'm one. I pray to God I am one, because if I'm not, I'd better shoot myself. It's an evolutionary mystical stream, which is saying there is a birth. Its terms are amazing and rigorous, and we need to address those terms and get serious about the kinds of disciplines that will really help us get humble and wiry and focused and passionate and joyful enough to do the work in and under the divine and surrender to the divine.
Yeah.
And that if we can do this, which is very difficult, or better still, if we can let this be done in us, which is even more difficult, then something miraculous is possible, which is that this great death that's happening will turn out to be the birth of an unimaginable beauty and splendor and humble empowerment, which will change the whole experience of human life by divinizing every aspect of it. And that is the other strand of teaching that's happening too, and that is the only game in town, because that's really what is needed, is a very clear vision of this evolution coupled with a really clear statement that I've tried to give in my book, The Hope, that the new enlightenment is love in action, not separating spirituality from politics, not separating mysticism from potentially walking peacefully and non-violently on Washington, not separating the deepest inner experience of divine love with from acts of compassion and justice and standing up for the voiceless and witnessing the agony of the animals and really, really trying with great love but great firmness to wake up the world to where it is and what needs to happen to avoid really radical destruction and annihilation.
It seems to me that the one of the saving graces for us around this is creativity, and I'd love for you to speak to that, and as kind of a third stream option versus the reaction sort of Hegelian dialectic that most people get caught up in.
Oh, I think that but true creativity comes from the soul, doesn't it?
Yeah.
True creativity is born out of deeper and deeper realization of the essence of reality and deeper empowerment by the energies of reality. And when realizations come together, realizations of essence and energy, then a being is born who can be a sacred instrument. And that is the kind of creativity we really should be after in every domain. What would sacred mystical scientists discover? What would sacred mystical doctors discover about the marriage between conventional forms of healing and radical shamanic forms of healing? What would they discover? It would be amazing. What would conventional artists and musicians discover if they surrendered their minds and hearts and bodies to this ecstatic experience of embodiment? What would they be able to create? What would architects create? What would politicians suddenly find themselves wanting to do despite their narrow, shrewd instincts? What would happen to the hearts of corporation leaders? They suddenly discovered that sitting on billions and billions of dollars of profits while 2 billion people live on less than $1 a day is not only obscene, but not a lot of fun in the end, because you could do something amazing with that money. Anything can happen when you discover the potential of your divine consciousness and the potential of the divine energy that's been graced to you from the divine mother that is the divine energy. So it's a very beautiful, very demanding path, but it's possible, it's real, it's here.
Could you speak to the dividing line between anger and passion, and how one can transform lucid anger into passionate energy to act?
I think it's the most important question, because I think without passion, real passion, you can never be in connection with the love force of the divine feminine, because that love force is a very passionate force. It's a passion of compassion, and it can also become a passion of divine outrage, because there is an aspect of the divine that is outrage, that is absolute purity, howling when violated by cruelty, when the creation is violated by terrible cruelty. And that is a very important source of sacred energy if it can be purified. So the most difficult thing for those who awaken their passion and their anger is to realize that passion is usually always awoken with a shadow and has to be purified by increasing giving of itself to the divine in adoration to be transmuted into divine passion. So one wonderful exercise you can do, and I do this a lot, is that when I feel completely furious, for example at BP, and it blinds my judgment that these are real people in really difficult situations themselves, who have been addicted to a false vision of reality but are also divine and need compassion and prayers for their clear seeing, because if they don't see clearly, millions more people will be impoverished and millions more animals might die. So when you see it like that, then you are really looking at the whole human family and trying to find the relationships between things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you have a copy of Heart Yoga near you by any chance?
Yes, I could find one. I could stagger up from my couch where I'm enjoying this conversation tremendously and go and see if I can find one. I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am. Thank you for
absolutely, indeed,
speaking so clearly and asking these wonderful questions. It's such a relief, because usually I feel I'm speaking Sanskrit, and I feel you really do hear what I'm saying or trying to say and help me become more clear. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate you being here. So one of the reasons why I asked you about the proximity of the book is in the introduction you have message from the Hopi elders.
Yes.
I thought was incredibly prescient for the time that we're in right now. I mean, you're ahead of the curve on this, and I was going to read it, but Andrew, you'd read it much better than I would. So I'm wondering if you could grace us with a recitation.
Oh, I would love to. Anything to impersonate a Hopi. I think the real wisdom is coming from the indigenous traditions now, and we must listen, because the indigenous elders are extremely alarmed, and I just, in Chartres, saw a DVD of messages from the indigenous elders from all over the world to the world at this moment, and I'm trying to get a film made to help them say this message to the world at large, because it's a very strong message. It really is a message that very, very difficult times are coming, and we have to prepare, and we have to understand what is possible and what could happen, and that we've got to get real about stopping pollution and environmental destruction and our catastrophically dissociated forms of life very soon, because otherwise we're just inviting annihilation. I mean, it's a very strong teaching. It's got no fluff about it, and I think it's time for the world to hear it. So the Hopi comes from the same tradition, the ones who have lived so deeply in communion with both the transcendent and the immanent in the earth, on the earth, and they're warning us and they're encouraging us. So speaking of the great death and encouraging us towards the birth. And this is what the Hopi say. We have been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people that this is the hour, and there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth, create your community, be good to each other, and do not look outside yourself for the leader. This could be a good time. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart, and they will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore and push off into the river. Keep our eyes open and our heads above water. See who is there in with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that you do now must be done in a sacred manner as in celebration. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Said by the elders of the Hopi Nation at Oribe, Arizona on June the 8th, 2000, announcing this tremendous last turn of the ancient indigenous calendars that is our last hope and final hope to really turn this around.
That's incredibly timely for where we are now, especially the relationship with water. As you know, in the area that you're close to, they have the Ogallala aquifer, which is one of the biggest aquifers on the planet, and it's about a quarter dry now.
Yeah.
And we hear the daily, well, sometimes we hear the daily news about the Gulf, but we're in a serious water crisis on this planet. And that's
the water is going to be now the source of wars.
Yeah.
There'll be water wars because the livelihood of millions, the survival of millions will depend upon them, and it's going to be simply horrific. It's insane what we've let happen to water, but it's such a symbol of our insanity because water is the fundamental element of life. We should have cherished it above all things.
So as you move from that wonderful prayer, you have another section called Setting Your Intention for the Sacred. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one of the things that I think characterizes the Americanization of yoga is that it's made yoga very much a kind of higher narcissism. You just go and you do these fantastic exercises that make you feel fabulous, and you look thin and fabulous, and that helps you in your great American dream of realizing the perfect life with the perfect Malibu condo. And there's that vision of yoga, which is a trivialization of yoga, because yoga is meant to be a discipline for the divinization of the whole being, including the body. And that is an enormously sacred discipline. So that you cannot really be beginning to practice yoga in the way that we are envisaging it in heart yoga without realizing that you're not practicing this self-liberation for yourself alone. In fact, you'll never achieve it if you practice it for yourself alone, because there is no self. You are inextricably connected to everything. So you'll only be truly practicing this yoga if you dedicate every single emotion of joy and peace that you have while doing the practice to the liberation of all sentient beings. And really pray that all the ease and joy that you experience in yoga is given immediately away to all sentient beings to relieve them of suffering, and that you are forged by this practice to become a wish-fulfilling jewel, a bodhisattva, a sacred activist, a tender warrior lover of service, who goes out into the world to take all of this unified force field into reality and sacred action. So, when you really have dedicated your whole practice and all of its joys and peace to sentient beings in that way, then I give 3 prayers from different traditions which are wonderful to say at that moment, because they allow you to focus your entire intention to the whole of reality, to the transformation of reality into the divine birth. And this is very important, because if you don't really, really go into that dimension of sacredness immediately, then you won't have the full experience of yoga.
Right. Well, it's interesting because, there's this book called, I think it's called The Great which is about the story of yoga as it was brought into this country. I forget the guy's name, but it's the title of the book is called The Great That's what he called himself. And as a result of that original intention, I believe that there is a layer of pacification associated with yoga and this transcendental reality that people have been trying to achieve through yoga. And what you're talking about is something very different. It's a different tableau for yoga in general.
Well, traditional yoga has the aim of kaivalya, which is really separation from the body, that you do traditional yoga in order to attain the state of the self, which knows that the body is transient and the only reality is the self. And that aligns it with classical Vedanta and the systems of renunciation of India, which are very profound and have great truths. But the yoga of the heart yoga is a tantric yoga, so therefore it demands 3 stages. It demands that you do know your divine consciousness, but that then you start the difficult work of marrying that consciousness to your mind and heart, and eventually to your body, so that the whole of your being and all of its desires and impulses and shadows can be transmuted into living service of divine love, and so that you can be born as a divine human being. That is a different path, and our heart yoga is dedicated to that path while honoring absolutely the other path, because if you're taking the true second path, you're going to have to learn all the truths and honor all the truths of the kaivalya path, of the renunciation path, because unless your embrace of the world is purified by ascesis and renunciation, it will be tainted by subtle desire, which could be very dangerous and not enable you to have the full tantric experience. So they belong to each other. But the heart yoga is a path of embodiment, of incarnation. And that requires really an understanding of the 5 great joys of the sacred marriage, that the sacred marriage is the ultimate reality of the universe as portrayed in all the great traditions. And it's a marriage in which the one becomes the two, each part of which contains aspects of the other, such as in the yin-yang diagram, which then deeply interpenetrate and make love to each other in all sorts of ecstatic ways to create the entire universe. And that is what is happening in reality. So that is what you need to get into connection with at the deepest level, with the ananda of that immense, radiant intermingling and interpenetration of absolute and relative light and matter, spirit and body, heart and mind, all the polarities fundamentally unified in cosmic, conscious, blissful lovemaking, which produces the ultimate ananda, the ultimate bliss. And this bliss has 5 aspects, which we consecrate in Heart Yoga and develop very simple but very powerful asana sequences to embody and use to help people embody the deepest aspects of them. Very beautiful poetry, mystical poetry from Rumi and Hafiz and Mechthild of Magdeburg and others. And also beautiful holy light practices and workings with the chakra body, so as to give people a very deep sense of how various bodies interpenetrate in the body and are simultaneously ignited by a more conscious yoga. So this is what Heart Yoga is doing.
Mm. Now, are you planning on doing a DVD along with this book at some point?
Yes, but I think it may be early days yet. We're actually about to unfold the whole of Heart Yoga for 2 days with my institute tomorrow and the next day, and we're going to film it. And we're going to see, looking at the film, whether we've got to the right place of being able to communicate just how potentially radical and transforming this yoga really is. Because you need, I've found very often when you're bringing in a vision that you've tested in very secret circumstances. We tested this yoga for 5 years up in British Columbia, where Karuna lives, and in various small spiritual centers, and each time we were amazed at how powerful it was, and also learned a great deal from what people were experiencing and what we were experiencing. So now I think we are ready to give it out, but we've got to find the right medium, the right art, the right music, the right setting to do it, because I think it could be done in a very holy and inspiring way, which we need to think through.
It seems like it's a natural fit based on what I've been able to read so far with the book and the various poses. And
it would be a wonderful DVD. I'm just trying to think of how it needs to be accompanied by music, by poetry, just to as a complete feast for the senses of the soul.
I totally agree. When I was reading through your bio, I came across the piece where you believe that Rumi and Shamsi Tabriz were lovers, and it said a radical assertion. I'm not sure how radical that is. I mean, it's pretty clear to me that they were lovers, and I wonder if you could talk about that and how you think that, or how you feel about people thinking that that's really a radical assertion or perception on your part.
Well, it's strange actually, because I've changed my understanding of them a little, and I'd like to explain.
Okay.
I think they were completely interpenetrating, and that being completely interpenetrating at the level that they were goes beyond anything that can be ever incarnated, because it's a love of the soul so deep that you are already what you make love to someone to become. You're already one. And I know this kind of love because I have it for the Dalai Lama, and I have it from my great teacher, Father Bede Griffiths. And it's a love of adoration so deep, a love of tender worship so profound, a love of respect so absolute, that it melts you into the essential being of the other. It's a way in which hearts transmit ultimate knowledge to each other. It's the most sublime love. And I suspect that is what they really experience, because that only a love at that transcendent height could ever have given birth to the astounding fountain of mystical understanding that Rumi gave to the world. Which doesn't mean that thinking that they were physical lovers is an absurd or obscene thing, because I think that kind of love would have embraced the possibility of physical passion, even if it negated it. It would have been open to everything. But I feel now not needing the physical expression. And I think that that's an even greater revelation of what's possible between men, because that opens it out to all kinds of men. And it's probably what men are truly seeking in each other, straight or gay, don't you think?
Well, I think we're seeking connection
and radical love. I think it's connection of the most radical kind. I think men have a very deep need for masculine love of the highest kind. I do, and I think that all men do, and this is one of the great revelations that's happening in our time, and I think it's great because I see a lot of young guys who are getting it, don't you?
Right. Well, I'm not sure if I see a lot of young guys getting it, but I'll tell you what's interesting from a sports level. And that's what happened recently with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, who all decided that they wanted to play together. They all could have gone to different teams. I'm not thrilled about how LeBron James went about his process. I thought it was incredibly crass and commercial to the point where it almost turned me off completely of professional sports. But I will say that the choice that they made was to be with one another and to experience and play with one another, which is unique and heretofore has not been done in the realm of professional sports, where three guys have said, "Hey, let's do this together. We like doing this together. Let's hang out." Oh, we've lost him. We have lost our friend Andrew. Let's find out who's on the line. I'm going to dial Andrew back in. Let's just see who's here. Hi, you're on with me, and we're going to give Andrew back in a moment. Who is this? Hello? Hello, you there? Going once, going twice. I'm going to hang up. I'll see you later. Let's see if we get Andrew back, and let's get him on his not-so-secret line that I wanted to do the cell phone here. 55693. Hold on. Wow, broke the spell for just a moment. Start talking about LeBron James. Look what happens. 6. 9. Here we go.
I am so sorry, my phone went dead.
That's okay. I think the whole LeBron James thing broke the spell. Anyway,
it's wonderful. No, I heard bits of it, and I entirely agree. I think it was very interesting.
Yeah, and it's a new paradigm. And I don't agree with their process, but I think that what they did was ultimately interesting because, I dabble with astrology, and I saw it as being a very different move. That was an Aquarian move. That was a synergistic group move. And it wasn't like, I'm going to be the Piscean hero and save the day for my team or some other team that's going to be the highest bidder. I'm going to synergize my efforts with two other guys I really like, and we're going to do this together.
Wonderful. I
thought it was a kind of a breakthrough. Again, I don't like how he got there, but what comes out of this, I think, will be very interesting to witness. And
it's a wonderful way of looking at it. I think that's a very beautiful way of looking at it. And what a sign that is for how men may be able to relate in years to come, that this would be a much more joyful and sensuous and intelligent way of relating to each other, wouldn't it?
I think men, ultimately, and I think women as well, in their own way, men and women, we need to be seen and we need to be recognized. And I think in the same sex, it's pretty vital. especially for men
Very much so.
through so much wounding for so many years. And I, again, playing with the astrological timetable, we're about to enter Saturn in Libra, and I really think that that's going to augur a more balanced relationship, both with our own as males, our own inner masculine and feminine, and for females, vice versa. And I think we're going to be able to round off this foray into feminism and metrosexuality. And I think we have an opportunity to really begin to understand and relate to one another as whole beings, and claiming those masculine parts that we've tossed away in order to be sensitive and to be loved.
I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that as a time that's coming, and I'm really hoping, Andrew, that this feeds into this act of sacred activism, because now we can enter into those spaces from much more whole places inside of ourselves.
Oh, good. I agree with you. God, yes. I think the great sexual healing that's happening on every level is very important, and I think that the real truth of the marriage of the mother and the father within the one is enacted in a sacred androgyny, the kind of marriage of the masculine and the feminine that takes place in both men and women, and that both sexes are going through this revolution, and we're having very powerful, very feminine women appearing, and very sensitive, very powerful men appearing. And this is wonderful, because it means that there's the defamations of feminism or all of the rubbish that only places one emphasis, is that now the marriage is appearing. It's here. We're seeing how beautiful it is.
Yeah. Can you mentioned something about the Dalai Lama a few moments ago, and I've been thinking for a while now about pacifism in Buddhism and pacifism in Christianity, and how there is, on the one hand, a really wonderful component to turning the other cheek, forgiveness, compassion, loving thy neighbor, and from the Buddhist perspective, compassion and detachment, and all of these things are wonderful. But I feel like, in a lot of respects, that they have been violated and played upon and manipulated by forces that understand these components to these various belief systems. And I've been trying to reconcile in my own life the relationship to that kind of, for lack of a better term, forgiveness and surrender, with a more active and a more like, hey, fuck that, this doesn't play, and we're not going to take it anymore. There's a real balance in there for me with those belief systems, and kind of where we're headed now with BP, where it's like, no, we're not going to take this anymore. Can you talk about that, and how you think that those two belief systems have been played out to this point in time, and where we go moving forward with that?
Well, maybe I think that the passive surrender can turn into weakness in the end, in the face of a really ruthless enemy. I think Gandhi's... Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
I think Gandhi was able to do what he did because fundamentally he was up against a pretty ruthless imperial class in England, but one that actually still believed in its own law. So there was something decent in the British soul, for all of its imperial lunacy, that could be appealed to. But this is certainly not the case in China. The Dalai Lama told me when I interviewed him in Oslo the time he got the Nobel Prize, that although he was a committed pacifist in many, many ways, he also was a committed pacifist because if anybody started rebelling in Tibet, the Chinese would use it as an excuse for even deeper genocide. So he was facing a completely different kind of opponent, far more psychotic and out of control, even than the British. And so his hands at the deepest level was tied because he was having to negotiate with people who were morally and spiritually infected by a psychosis that was rendering them crazy. So at a very deep level, he has been consciously sitting down with great compassion with people whom he knows are caught in a psychosis which is potentially terribly destructive to his own people and terribly destructive to themselves.
What did you think of the Peace Flotilla? Did you think that that was a good example of sacred activism?
What was it? What did you say?
The Peace Flotilla, when they brought the ships in from Turkey into off the coast of Israel, and they wanted to bring aid to the Palestinians, and they got raided by...
Well, I think it was an extremely brave act. I think it was a very provocative act, and it risked a great deal, but I think it was a very brave act, and I am not a convinced and complete pacifist, I have to say. I am a paradoxical kind of pacifist. I think everybody should be trained in nonviolent behavior and in nonviolent action so as to gain all the skills of nonviolent communication and deep shadow work and everything. But I also think that they are the only people who could ever commit what you could call enlightened violence, a violence prompted not by hatred and not by desire to kill, but by a desire to defend things that have to survive. And it could happen in human history that we have to fight. After all, if Churchill had just said, okay, let's just embrace the Hitler hordes and make a deal, we keep the empire, they have whatever they want, we'd be fine. Well, the world would have been plunged into a Nazi night, which could have ended every possibility of the birth of civilization. Those possibilities are here now. I think one of the most dangerous aspects of our crisis is that there's quite clearly two versions of unity running for the finishing post. One is the kind of radical unity of the whole human family through a disaster in a divine process which leads to justice and balance and harmony. That's the unity of the birth. The other is a unity of the corporate military-industrial complex with massive media power to use fear and trivialize everything, coupled with enormous nuclear power, coupled with enormous financial power on every level.
Right.
So that could get pretty fascist if the conditions were right. So we really have to work hard to wake people up to the danger.
You know,
it's already tried to take over the country during the Bush administration. I mean, they behaved like fascist gangsters and they raped the Constitution in full view of everybody while keeping a media campaign of fear to keep people so intimidated that they sacrificed their conscience.
Well, yeah, it's still going on.
The America. Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, there are some bills in Congress right now that are being pushed by Joe Lieberman, which are cutting at the core of what we call constitutional freedoms, especially shutting down the internet. He's really pushing hard to have that backdoor switch. And in fact, I'm not sure whether you saw this or not, but 73,000 websites got shut down over the last couple of days on part of the WordPress servers because they theoretically were running copyright infringement content. We're not talking pornography. We're talking, perhaps movies, music, but it was a very broad stroke and unprecedented in terms of powers being acted upon on the internet. And this is now what we're beginning to stare down. And unfortunately, what we saw during the financial crisis was people calling Washington and begging, yelling, stomping their feet, exclaiming for them not to bail Wall Street out. And that worked for about 48 hours. And then Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson got everybody in a room and basically said, you either pass this or we're calling out martial law. And the next thing you know, this thing's passing. So we're in really unprecedented times, Andrew, in terms of leadership not being responsive to us. And it's naked. It's out there. It's in our face. And they're basically saying, there's not a lot you can do about this right now. And for me, as just a person that's doing the best I can and having dialogue with people like you and other folks, we have to have something in our tool belt to be able to deal with this kind of affront, really, is what I would call it, to our decency and our ability to have a democratic and a call and response with our leaders. What's your thought?
Well, well, the thing, I think people have to empower themselves in this situation and stop looking to the leaders of any kind to do it for them.
They're not going to. They're just not.
Oh, yes, they are. That's what I think you may be
wrong. The leaders are not. I mean, they're clearly showing that they're not listening.
Oh, the leaders are absolutely not going to do anything. We're going to watch in Cancun in the winter. The world leaders do nothing very intelligent about the climate, if anything. We aren't. Anybody who thinks that the corporations and the political leaders are now going to do anything serious to alter the situation, I think, should be all sent to an asylum in Maui where they can talk to each other and bore the hell out of each other because they're insane. It is obvious that we're in a vast network of interlocking powers which thrive in their own universe and depend upon the subjugation of the whole world, really.
Yeah.
They don't care that 2,000 billion people are dying a day. They don't care that the seas are polluted. They don't care about anything that's really happening. They can't, because if they did, it would entirely change their pursuit of power, wealth, money, and this domination ethic, which is prehistoric. I mean, they might as well just become dinosaurs.
It is prehistoric, and it's and I think in many ways it's completely historic in the sense that I don't think we've ever stared down. I think what does Brzezinski call it? A technotronic. He calls it a technotronic. It's not even a technotronic democracy. It's a technotronic. I mean, that's the word that Brzezinski uses. It's technotronic in the sense that there's immense technology that's available now that wasn't available during the Third Reich. I mean, we're.
Oh, are you kidding? I mean, Hitler will look like a tea party compared to this kind of fascism because Hitler didn't have the nuclear bomb or the hydrogen bomb or very advanced kinds of biological warfare. Hitler didn't have television, let alone mega television sets in every room. Hitler didn't have the internet. Hitler didn't have global corporate monsters that he could control to control economic life. But I mean, an authoritarian, one world sort of unified force field, horrible government could do all of those things, could have all of those things, as well as a media perfectly controlled to just issue idiotic news and endless reality shows forever. I mean, that's my 1984 on crack.
Yeah.
And it's possible this is real, it's here, but also the birth is here. The exact opposite is here.
Absolutely.
The dance of opposites that our destiny is now being danced in all the opposites, isn't it?
I would agree with that because everything that you said is true, and the enormity of it, I believe, is true, and the scale of it is true, but the inverse of that is also true proportion to scale as well. And
yes, it's exactly right, because this is a divine event, and it is balanced in the divine. Because the divine is balanced, now we have to find the way through by really committing ourselves to the birth and to birthing the birth in and under the laws that govern the birth, and stop pretending that they have anything to do with anything that the New Age has to say about anything.
If you could give people 5 pieces of practical wisdom that they could practice in their everyday lives to facilitate this type of birth, what would they be?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to do some kind of simple meditation or prayer, something that you love to do that takes you every day into the presence of your deepest self. So choose a practice that you love and practice it regularly, because it will begin to reveal to you that you're so much more than the person you think you are, that you are have great levels of inner peace and great levels of inner harmony, which will delight you and help you change the outer structure of your life. Secondly, really have the courage to see exactly where we are, and it takes a lot of courage to do that, because the only way to become strong enough to get through this next part is to start preparing for a big storm without terror, but grounding yourself in the deepest part of yourself, which you can only discover through sacred practice, as I suggested in the first suggestion. And start getting real about truly experiencing your deepest self, so as to be able to be strong enough in faith and strong enough in resolve whatever comes down, because no one knows what is going to come down, but we all now know, I think, that nothing but a great shattering could ever heal the great disease that we are sick with. The third thing is to really take seriously simplifying your life, because great financial chaos is likely now. I would have thought it's very close. And there will be a lot of uncertainty, so don't strap yourself with fantastic consumerist dreams. They're all about to be solved. Let's get real about what we truly need and simplify your life and get your expenses down and start realizing that a very simple, ordinary life with people you love, doing things that are devoted to helping others, is not a bad life. It's a glorious life. It's the life which has always made human beings most happy, and just realize that this can be built right now. And the fourth thing is to really pursue your physical and moral and emotional and spiritual health, because exercise, dance, celebrate, look after your diet, get ready to be strong for the next unfolding of the great evolutionary game, and get ready by becoming strong and healthy and supple as far as you can, and you can at whatever age you are. Fifthly, I would say to everybody, take heart. Do not be afraid. It's going to be very rough, but there is an amazingly just, balanced, harmonious love intelligence of the highest kind and love energy of the highest kind that is directing this evolutionary leap. And it will give you astonishing help if you align yourself with it through true surrender, true humility, true devotion, true spiritual inner work, and true dedication to pouring out what you discover inside into acts of justice and compassion, and standing up for the oppressed and voicing the pain of the voiceless, and doing the work of sacred activism. And that's what I would say.
Well, I think those are all incredibly salient and important and simple acts that we can all take. And, Andrew, I really want to thank you for coming on and hanging out with me for the last...
Oh, my God, I would hang out with you. You sound wonderful. I'd like to meet you. Such interesting questions, my God. Thank you.
Well, maybe we'll get there one of these days, and I'll come down to Taos and visit my friends down there and hang out with my friends.
Oh, I would love to meet you. Thank you for your wonderful time and conversation. I so enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to do this, and I'll say hi to Richard Grossinger, who's a buddy of mine, and tell him we had a good chat. Obama is on Mount Carmel Island, and I think Richard is actually there right now. He's got his place on Bar Harbor, so in the vicinity.
They may meet.
You never know. Maybe
that would be a fascinating conversation.
I think it would be incredibly fascinating. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that. So
yes, we should script it.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, once again, thank you. Take good care of yourself.
Thank you so much. Would you please send me a tape of this? I would love to have it from my website when it comes
absolutely.
out.
I'll hook you up, and we'll make sure you get a copy. Okay?
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Take care now. Bye-bye. Well, that was Andrew Harvey, and that was an hour and a half of just wonderful, exquisite wisdom. You're not going to find many people like that at his level that are that keyed in and can really dance with the nature of duality and can see it at a level that Andrew does, both in terms of light and dark. And I'm thrilled that he was on the show tonight. And of course, you'll be able to listen to this on the back end once I shut this down. I've got, I wanted to end the show with Andrew with those 5 pieces. I probably could have talked to him for about another half an hour and strung it out for the entire 2 hours, but I felt like we talked about a lot of things and covered a lot of ground, and it was probably good to end on that note. I got 32 minutes left in this vehicle. If you want to call, the number is 347-308-8995, 347-308-8995. If you have any questions about tonight's show, any comments about what Andrew and I talked about, if you have any examples around sacred activism or how you feel the world is evolving and simultaneously de-evolving, we can talk about it in the remainder of the show. 347-308-8995, and certainly we can have our own little dialogue in the remaining moments. And if I don't hear from you or anybody else in the next 5 minutes or so, I'm just going to close down shop and try and catch the last rays of the day and do my evening meditation on my bicycle. How's that? So 347-308-8995. Andrew's book is Heart Yoga. Let me give you the full title. It's Heart Yoga, The Sacred Marriage of Yoga and Mysticism. It is on North Atlantic Press, North Atlantic Books, and you can get that right. There's a link to it right here on the blog talk page, which you're probably looking at. There's also a link to it on my website. You can go to Amazon and get it. I think Amazon has copies for about $12. At least that's what I saw when I went to put the link up. Normally goes for $17.95. On the Amazon, it's $12 right now, so you can pick up a copy of Andrew's wonderful new book. If you're into yoga already, you will love this because Andrew actually steps you through a series of asanas for various levels of activation and intention. And I can definitely see a DVD coming out about this with the right poetry and the right music and all the stuff that's attendant and goes along with the work here. And I think that he really touched on, the last thing he touched on is getting in spiritual, emotional, psychological, and physical shape. And the last one is something I'm going to be working on. And I've just turned a corner last night. I did not feel all that great physically. And I decided to cut out some vices and really get down to being in a state of condition that I can feel good about, and because I'm not there right now, if I'm honest with myself. So that's my point of focus. So that, I think that's it. We're not gonna get a lot of calls. It seems like I think you're all just awestruck with what just happened with Andrew and I, and you just want to let it rest. I get that. It's like a fine steak. We just took that steak. Talk about health, huh? It's grass-fed. Okay, it's a grass-fed steak. It is a wonderful organic grass-fed steak, and the guy that actually butchered the cow looked the cow in the eyes and had a compact with the cow. Okay, so let's just set the setting there. That's the kind of steak I'm talking about. Now we've just pulled that steak off the grill, and now we're going to let that steak set. That's the analogy I want to use for the interview tonight with Andrew. It was a great journey. So I'll be back tomorrow. We'll be looking at more news, likely more Gulf news, and who knows where else it will take us. So that's it. You've been listening to the Sunday night version of Free Association Radio. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'm your host, and as always, use your head to discern what's real and your heart to stay open to what's possible. I will see you tomorrow.